do it. All right, welcome. Happy Thursday, everybody. Today we are with Clarence, and he actually has his colleague Chuck with Abbott Construction joining. You'll see him pop in and on the camera in a little bit. So today we are talking about making tomorrow a safer day by using safety consultants. The reason I joined STA, and I think many of you guys have as well, is just doing everything we can to future-proof our firm, to future-proof ourselves. And we do that in so many different ways. It takes a village to run a business through CPAs and attorneys and consultants and coaches and advisors. And it never occurred to me until recently that maybe we should also have a safety consultant. I didn't know before a couple months ago they even existed. Didn't know what it would look like. So I was introduced to Clarence from Just Hickey, and about 10 minutes after meeting you, Clarence, it was very clear that not only should we, but we could be doing a lot more. So I'm super excited about today, and just your presentation that you put together. It's just so beautiful. It's things I didn't even know existed. And so it really is an amazing opportunity to take the next step and go a little bit farther, go beyond a section in an employee manual or sending your team on a course about safety. It's about having a safety advocate. Sorry, my dog. It's about being a safety advocate, showing your team that you care and you care about your clients and your projects and the schedule and the budgets. So sorry. It's about how to be safe, what to do, when to do it, how to make it a full team approach. And so that's why we have Clarence here. And Clarence, just from your resume, I mean, you've been doing this for well over 30 years, and I'm not going to be able to do your background justice. There's just so many things that you've done in this arena, from compliance assessments, program development, training, expert witness testimony, and incident investigations. I mean, we could probably do a whole hour on just your background. And Clarence's goal is like ours. It's just to protect our firm and protect our workers. So with that, Clarence, please feel free to piggyback on anything relevant I missed, and then take it away.
No, that's great. And thanks for asking me to do this. I really kind of see it as an opportunity to just talk about safety to somebody who hasn't heard of this before, okay? But just to start out with, it's important that everybody understand that they have a duty, to protect. Every company out there has a duty to protect. And you have a duty to protect your employees, your subcontractors, the client, just the general public, from anything that occurred during the course of the work that you perform or the work that you do. Now, OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Act that was passed in the 1970s, set the guidelines for what that protection is supposed to look like. States have the opportunity to either adopt OSHA or to have their own state plan, but it has to be at least as equal to OSHA. So if I'm talking about OSHA or OSHA state plan, they're pretty much the same. But like I said, you have a duty to protect, but you have a duty to follow those rules and regulations that are set down. You also want to protect your company from financial harm. That's important to the sustainability of your company, to your employees. Just as an example here for that, I was doing an expert witness testimony for a company who received a penalty of $200,000 for a few violations on one of their jobs. They did underground utility work. Now, $200,000, yes, that's a lot of money, but they stood to lose a lot more than that because they did a lot of work for the Department of Transportation. And if they had serious violations on their record, then they could not get contracts with the Department of Transportation. So you can see just the duty to protect people, but also the duty to protect your company is just super important. Can you all see my slides as I'm going through them, or?
It's staying on the first one, so if
here we go. All right, let me go to the next one here. That's one I just discussed. Okay. But I want you all to know accidents do happen, and in my experience, what I've come up with is there's a couple of things that we can do to stop those from happening or keep them from happening, but that's to recognize the cause of them. But accidents do result as a result of unsafe acts, and that means that the worker fails to follow the protocols, the training, the instruction that's been given to them. So that unsafe acts can cause an accident. Unsafe conditions, and that's where the worker was exposed to a condition beyond the worker's control. Now, very basic, just real simple, but a worker is carrying kind of a bulky kind of a box, and he's walking down an aisleway or a pathway, and he steps on something that rolls, that rolls under his feet. Now he's slipped, turned an ankle, and maybe did some other injury due to carrying the box. Well, what was that the result of? Was that the result of an unsafe act or unsafe condition or both? So in this particular case right here, I would say that that was a result of unsafe acts because the employee should have checked his path to make sure it was clear because his vision was going to be blocked. And the unsafe condition if somebody left something in the aisleway. So those two things will usually exist with most accidents, but not always. But yeah, unsafe acts and unsafe conditions, that's taken it right down to the basics of what causes accidents to happen. Now, your plan to prevent accidents. Well, if you don't have a plan to prevent the accident, then you're surely going to fail at preventing them. That's for certain. OSHA and most state plans offer sample accident prevention programs. If you go to the website, you can find these sample programs that are offered, and they're offered for most industries. If you already have an accident prevention program, I would suggest that your company compare your accident prevention program to one of those samples. You can go through and just side by side and walk through to make sure that you are being as equal as you can to what the state or OSHA has provided for you if you don't already have a plan. Your accident prevention plan, it's not just for management, and it's not just for the supervisors, and it's not just for the safety officer. Your accident prevention program should be being used by everybody. All of your employees should have access to it, and it should be something that they reference frequently in the course of their work. Now, I'm going to give an example here of ladders. This is one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment most companies own. You can check the statistics yourself if you want to take my word for it, but it's a very dangerous piece of equipment, and it's very common. On almost any type of an occupation. Even office workers use ladders from time to time. Okay, if your employees use ladders, you should have a comprehensive ladder policy because they are that dangerous. Your company should have some form of pre-task planning. If people are going to be using ladders or any other equipment, then their pre-task plan should be describing how and when and how to choose the correct ladder. The pre-task plan should contain the references to the accident prevention program as well. So your pre-task planning is a very important part of your overall accident prevention program. Now shifting up just a little bit here to my experience is that you can see this. It says your project will have 3 fatalities before completion. I was working on a project. It was a powerhouse. Our estimated manpower was going to be probably about 500 employees during the peak part of the construction of that project. And we were having a pre-construction meeting that included the insurance company representatives. And this was something that they said during that meeting, and they had the statistics to prove it, just based on the number of employees, the type of work we were going to be doing, because that's how they figure out how much they're going to charge you for your insurance. So anyway, yeah, your project will have 3 fatalities before completion. And believe me, I was having serious thoughts about my career path at that particular moment, because I don't think I could handle 3 fatalities. And yes, it did. It kept me awake at night. And I needed to find a way to prove that insurance company was wrong about that. So I went back to the basics. Those seem to be a good starting point. And what are those basics? What are the causes of accidents? And so we've already talked about that: unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. So that's where I'm going to start that's where I started my program, is how am I going to prevent those things? I like to say this all the time: good is the enemy of great. Does your company have a good safety program? Well, I worked with lots of companies, and a lot of them have good safety programs, but they also have poor safety records. So good isn't going to get you where you want to be of having 0 accidents out there. If you want to keep your employees safe and your company protected, then you need to get started as soon as you can to make your accident prevention program great. Now, preventing unsafe acts, and how do we do that, is through education, inspection, and follow-up. Every company should have a new to the job or new to the company orientation, and it should be a comprehensive training program. This is your company's first and most important opportunity to prevent the worker from having an on-the-job injury. Don't fail in this effort. Make your orientation to stand out. Make it so that the employee, when they walk out of that, they went, wow, that was like the best orientation I have ever had, and make it the best one that they will ever have. Because if you can do that at that moment, and you've impressed upon them your company safety policy and how you really do care about the employees that that work for your company. Okay, now education again. Your weekly safety training and daily safety huddles are recommended for your people. Now, if you are in certain industries, by code, you're only allowed to have monthly safety meetings, or if you have a safety committee. So there's a little flexibility there. But if you've got employees that you can gather together for a weekly safety training in some way, that should be your goal. And if you have a crew on the ground, you should have a huddle before you start work. It could be 5 or 10 minutes, but that's where you go over your pre-task plan. You discuss the process that you're going to take to get the job done. And if hazards or unsafe acts are happening, then you should have a stand down immediately. We're discovered a problem here. Let's stand down and get everybody together. Let's refresh our pre-task planning. Let's dig out the accident prevention program to review policies if we have to. But that's, you don't let unsafe acts or unsafe conditions exist without doing something about it. One of the other things that you want to do is establish a program to discover hazards. This is if you had to sit in court in a witness stand because there was an accident on your project, or because you're appealing a citation, you're going to be asked, what is your process to discover your hazards? Do you have any daily safety inspections or weekly safety inspections? But if you should have at least daily safety inspections in most environments, and those should be organized, formal, and documented, so that you can present that information at any time to somebody who's asking about your latest safety inspections. This is just one other aspect of that is you have to establish a process to correct unsafe acts. The state or OSHA plans, they do not require that compliance officers cite or fine employees. Okay, they're exempt from any fines, but they do expect the employer to have a program of enforcement. And most companies do have some sort of like a 3 or 4 level enforcement. Where first you get a verbal, then you get a written or whatever. But you also be creative with that and do other things besides some formal written, or we're going to write somebody up for some safety violation. You can also just establish a thing that if you're violating a rule, you're committing an unsafe act, or you're creating an unsafe condition, that we would just take you back to another training program and put you back through a training program. It doesn't have to be anything real long or real in depth, but enough that you've covered the topic where the unsafe act or the unsafe condition was coming from. You should establish a process here too that, back at your orientation, you want to have something in there so that people recognize from their orientation that they agreed to work for you in a safe manner. And that if they're not willing to work in accordance with the company safety policy, that they should seek work elsewhere. That should be very, very clear to them. Follow up with an evaluation to look for trends. Hopefully you're not having any trends, and you can just say, we don't need an evaluation because we're not having any trends. That's the best condition that's out there for that. Okay, back to it here, but protect the workers. Give them a clean and safe workplace. No unsafe conditions. Give them all the information they need to do their job safely. So that's through training, orientations and training. No unsafe acts. Check on them frequently to show your concern for their safety. You're not inspecting them. You're not coming in to audit your workers or that sort of thing. Let them know that you're there. You're just looking for the things that can get them injured, and you want to keep that from happening. And that's why you're coming around to check on them frequently. Like I said, by doing those inspections and doing them frequently. Now, here's some common safety topics. Each of these topics right here is a training program that deserves attention on its own. I put ladders at the top of that list because, as I mentioned earlier, the stats show us that it's one of the most unsafe pieces of equipment in our workplaces. Not that they're responsible for fatalities, but they're responsible for a lot of hospitalizations. Fall protection, falls from one level to another, is one of the most frequent causes of death in the workplace. Fall protection and a couple of others here have a unique set of rules that goes with them that says if you have people exposed to fall hazards, then they have to be supervised by a competent person. Now, that competent person is going to be somebody who is knowledgeable and has control and authority. Now, they don't have to be knowledgeable about every fall protection situation that ever existed, but whatever situation your employee is exposed to, they have to be knowledgeable of that particular hazard and the ways that are necessary to protect that worker. Aerial and scissor lifts, these are a couple of pieces of equipment that deserve training before the person uses it. And generic aerial and scissor lift training is not enough. It's got to be specific. It's got to be specific to the piece of equipment and in the location where it's going to be used. Scaffolds is another one of those topics that deserves a competent person to supervise. They supervise the selection, the assembly, the use, and the disassembly of the scaffold. Confined spaces deserves 3 levels of training. This is the supervisor has a level of training. The entrant, the person going into the confined space, has a certain level of training. And the attendant, if it's required, where you would have a person outside watching that confined space and watching out for the safety of the people inside. So those are 3 separate levels of training that would have to be conducted and documented. Hazardous materials and atmospheres, sometimes we go into spaces that's owned by somebody else, and we certainly don't want our people to walk into those spaces or something without any protection at all. We need to be investigating those. And if we use any chemicals or any products out there, we need to also be checking the safety data sheets and have a program called hazard communication that guides us there. That would be part of your overall accident prevention program. And the rest of these are pretty common too. Electrical safety, personal protective equipment. For personal protective equipment, you need to have an evaluation completed for each work site and for each worker's exposures to make sure that we've done a good job of selecting the personal protective equipment. Emergency action plans, what to do if is very important. And how and when to report injuries. This is part of the state or federal code that you teach your employees how and when to report injuries. So another important training program. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the things here that you need to do to protect your company. We've been talking about the employees. We're going to talk about the company here. Okay, be sure you have these documents for review always. Your accident prevention program, you should audit it each year. Post or document that you informed your employees of your company safety policy. Now that's usually included in the orientation. Basic job rules. This is something they also call for. Now, each employer is a little bit different, your basic job rules, but sometimes I talk to people like, well, I'm not sure what I should put into basic job rules, and I might write up a list for them, but I usually start out with know your job. If you don't know how to do your job safely, then stop and ask your supervisor. So that's what I mean by basic job rules, are not real specific. Posted on the job site and in plain sight of just about anybody that might be on the job site, at least where they can find it very quickly, is your overall emergency action plan, escape routes, emergency phone numbers, what personal protective equipment you might need if it was that kind of an emergency. Okay, you should have written proof that you regularly and frequently inspect your workspaces.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Go
That's
ahead.
a good reminder. Clarence, there was a question in the chat box from Carrie, and she asks, as architects, we spend most of our time in an office, but some employees do site visits during construction. Any tips for balancing in-office versus on-site safety plans? Do you find having two separate ones? I know you mentioned kind of the roles.
Yes, there are two separate environments. And so for construction, if you are involved in the construction process, then you're going to fall under the construction rules for that particular job site. If you are working in an office, then your rules that's going to guide you would be from the general industry. Okay, there is, I'm not sure which state that you're asking that question from, but in Washington State, we have what's called the core rules. And so those are the rules that apply to everybody. And then from that, then you can break out to where your specific industries, such as construction. Did that answer the question?
So I know she is in Washington, and she says, yes, good job. Perfect.
Now, the construction codes, the core rules are a specific set of rules. They're called the 800 code. So if you're in Washington State, it would be oh, great.
Section 800.
Yeah, it's in the, if you go to Washington State's website and you just look for the 800 codes, it'll ask you the core rules, and then you can click onto those. Okay, protecting your company with all the following. Proof that you conduct your safety meetings or that you have an active safety committee. There are some exceptions here, but safety meetings are always best for construction or small groups. Committees seem to always work best if you have a large organization, a very big, very large company with multiple locations or something where employees you can, and multiple divisions. But for individual job sites, safety meetings are always the best. Written proof that you enforce the safety rules, and I gave you an idea there that we documented that we had a worker who violated the rule or something like that, and we sent them off to a training program. That works very well too. Written proof that you conduct training, so make sure that they're dated and signed by a supervisor. There's a lot of topics that require an annual refresher, and so you would have to check the codes for those different topics, make sure that you are keeping those up to date. Hazard communication is one of those, the use of chemicals in the workspace. You're supposed to go through a little checklist of things, 14 things that you're supposed to discuss with your employees at least annually there. Written proof that equipment and other safety equipment or supplies are inspected when required, such as like fire extinguishers is a good example. Cranes, yes, I don't expect all of you to be working with cranes, but they also have to be inspected annually. Use your job hazard analysis program and your personal protective equipment evaluation plan to help guide you as well on some of these. Now, what I like to say here is there's a state or federal inspector or a lawyer that's just looking for a reason to say that your program is ineffective in practice. If you missed one of those things that I just listed here, yeah, they're going to try to use that against your company if they're trying to cite you or squeeze some money out of you for some reason. It's they're going to be emphasizing the part that you did not do. These are the important things that I've found to be in my experience. You should have those readily available. Now, if you don't have a bulletin board, you can use a handbook. If you have individual employees who go out to do inspections or to do some work, they're on their own. They should have a handbook because they don't have the benefit of a bulletin board. But a bulletin board is the perfect way to display what a great safety program that you have. You want to make sure that you sell it when people walk in the door, they're going to see onto the job site or into your building, that they're going to see this bulletin board that's going to tell them, yeah, this is a safe place to be. I've had this experience where compliance officers have visited a company or a project, and they've walked up to the bulletin board. That's a great, that the company's done a great job of this. and looked at that and said, hey, you folks are fantastic here, and said, here's my business card, give me a call if you've got any questions, because they could see your whole program right there on that bulletin board, open for display. Yeah, that's a good thing when they see that, and they can walk away and feel confident that they're not leaving a hazard behind. But the handbook, yeah, that would be good for the employee if they needed to make a reference to any of those things that are on the bulletin board.
Clarence, what's your
So, yes.
what's your experience with bulletin boards and remote workers? Is it electronic version and distributing it, and with, so just because I know a lot of us are remote too, or hybrid.
Yes, I think that that's fine. Yeah, you can certainly do that. You just want to be able to show that, if you needed to, that's how you communicate to your workers. So yeah, we've got a program here where we have people who are working remotely, and they can access the bulletin board and all that information. Yeah, they can access that online if they need to.
I was thinking about that too, Brittany, and thinking maybe a read only, just out of some concern that people might think, oh, good, I'm going to message my admin about my safety blooper that I just did, and that it would then be like documented with our other topics. So I don't know if read only sounds a little too locked down, but that's sort of where my head was going.
That's such a good idea.
No, I think that's best. It would be read only. You don't want people going in and trying to change your policy, or add things to the bulletin board, like they've got something
Also true.
or something. So you want to, keep it to safety and keep it to the stuff that's relevant.
Totally.
Well, here's the secret that I've learned is use the following slides that I've given you here: protect the workers and protect your company. And if you do those things listed on those two slides and do a great job of it, right? Good is the enemy of great. Just remember that. You need to do a great job of those things. And you're going to have a good program. You're going to have a successful program. In my career, I just want to mention there too, that project where I was told I would have 3 fatalities. Well, we didn't have any fatalities on that job site. And that was just fantastic. But like I said, that was boots on the ground, touring that job site many times a day, talking to workers, addressing those problems in the field as they would pop up. And it really turned out to be a very, very successful project for the company as well. Not just safety wise, but also a very successful project. Like in my long career, I've served, project safety officer, regional safety director, and safety director for companies. And in all that time, I never had a fatality on any project that I ever served on. And these were major projects, from 500 up to thousands of people on the job site. But I like to put the emphasis on doing the basics and doing a great job of doing those basics. Like I said, on my career, I've never settled for good or that's good enough. If you're doing great, if you got a really great program and things do slip a little bit, you're only slipping down into the good part. Okay, you're still doing a good job, but it doesn't take much to boost it back up to being a great effort to prevent accidents and prevent fatalities. Well, that was what I prepared for the meeting for today. And so if we've got any questions, now I've got Chuck Depew here with me. He's with Abbott Construction. And I'm going to let Chuck for just a minute here discuss what he does, but we're still open for any questions or anything. So Chuck, you want to slide over and tell them what you do? And I've been working with Chuck for about 15, 16 years here. And so we work together on the projects that he works on as well. I mean, we're working together. So I figured it'd be a good idea to have him come in and talk.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'm not real comfortable with going on and on and on about myself. I'd rather know, what are you folks dealing with and what are your challenges? But I'll give you a little bit of background. I've been at Abbott 16 years. I was with another GC in Seattle for 10 years before coming here. I got introduced to the building envelope world with the previous employer, and oftentimes I found myself, Clarence said you guys do a fair amount of that work as well, I understand. So I found myself, maybe like you guys, in some precarious situations, sometimes in the dead of night or different times when somebody was experiencing a traumatic leak experience, to go help them out. And you find yourself in some situations sometimes where you're going, whoa, I'm 140 feet up and the roof edge is 3 feet away and I don't have nothing to tie off to. And, that's the kind of stuff that I've dealt with over the years, or getting in a boatsman's chair and going down the side of a building, inspecting that. And, some people think we're kind of nuts for doing that, but Clarence has been a real aid to me in my career. Just, I don't know all the rules. I use a lot of common sense. I think we have a gauge inside that says, this isn't a good idea, or, I'm being safe or I'm not. So I'd like to use him as a resource. He's helped me a lot over my career, but I think, when you shared that comment about never having a fatality, I can't say that. I've been on a job where two people have unfortunately lost their life. And all I'll say to you guys about that is, once you experience that, you'll rethink everything you ever did. And you'll rethink it for a very, very long time. I could have done this. I wish I would have done that. So planning, I've learned over the years, is a critical step. And then educating. Who's going to be on site? Is it just going to be you? Is it going to be you and one of your newer employees? Are you going to have technical reps on site? Is an architect going to want to come up there? How about an owner, and what positions are we putting them in? And so it really makes sense to take some of this stuff that he's shared today to heart and plan, have a great program, not a good one. And if you don't know, dig in a little farther before you start the work, because once that accident happens, boy, you'll rethink everything. I love taking stuff apart and helping people figure it out. But myself and who's ever up there working with me needs to be safe while we're doing it. I don't care if it costs them a whole bunch more money for the safety setup. That's the most important thing. As a kid, a younger man, I didn't think about that as much, but I think that's part of life. And when you get older, you got a lot more to lose. And so I'm very, very focused on that now, putting myself and others in a situation that's unsafe. And like I said, the last thing I'll really say is, you're going to probably at some point find yourself in a situation where you go, man, am I legal here or not? And reach out before you put yourself and anybody else into that situation, and find that out, right? Ropes around rooftop units where you clip a metal anchor back to a rope and you put a harness and a lanyard on it. I've seen that so many times, and that's not how it's supposed to be used, right? And so I don't have a problem now with saying, hey, we're shutting this down for the day until we get the right equipment. That's just not going there. It's been a long time since I've done anything like that, and I refuse to do it again. So I guess my comment is, what's your guys' experience? What do you find yourself in where you go, I don't know what to do here. I'd like to hear maybe some questions or feedback about that. Maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, I've got plenty in my brain, but I want to get to the chat box, because there's Judy and Carrie who's got a couple questions. So I'll start with Carrie, and it looks like Gretchen too. So Carrie's asking, and she's in Washington. She says, I've looked at sample safety plans for construction, and they have quite a bit more than we encounter, their architects. Is there a point where the contractor's safety plan covers visitors on site?
Well, each employer is responsible for their own employees. They can't contract that away. But like I said, you look at a lot of those topics and you may not think that they apply to you, but you want to make sure you think that through. I recently did a accident prevention program for a steel erector, and a small company, but anyway, he was looking through the table of contents in there, and he says, Clarence, I don't need a asbestos program. I don't need that. I don't do asbestos. We're just a steel erector. And I said, well, I would recommend that you just go ahead and leave it in there anyway. It's not going to hurt anything. And he's insisting. He did not want it there. Said, okay. Well, about a month later, he called me up and he said, do you still have that asbestos program? He said, because I could put that in here because he says, I have a client who is insisting that I have that chapter in my book. And then as we went on to talk, he saw other possibilities where he might need that information. The information was just more or less just to say that they don't do asbestos work and they weren't going to work there, but they did need that policy or that program that said that in their manual. So as you're looking at the table of contents, like I said, think it through before you leave something out. I'm sure as an architectural firm, yeah, there's probably quite a few things that you could leave out. If your employees are getting into scissor lifts or articulated boom lifts, well, then you're going to want something in there about that. Even though you might be riding with the operator from your general contractor. But like I said, you'd want some sort of information or policy about that as well. Did that answer that question?
Carrie's shaking yes, so
Okay.
I would love to tag on to something here. Over the years, sorry, I hope I
Go
didn't
ahead.
step on your toes. Over the years, I was working for a GC on a big anchor projects because of my envelope experience. They put me on these bigger projects, and so you had multiple hats on with that. I might be, assistant superintendent, a superintendent, or a foreman, depending on the size of the project. And I was doing all the building envelope work as well. And we would get these safety plans from these companies that were like this thick. And I would say, whoa, there's a lot of information in here to what you just talked about, right? But it has to be site specific to the task that you're doing on the job, right? And that we ended up years and years working on this, slimming those books down. It was specific to what they were doing on the job, right? That's a key point, because they would have this big binder that they would just copy and paste from job to job to job, and it wasn't specific about what you were dealing with on the job.
Let me add something to that too, is like a lot of companies have an accident prevention program. And when I review it, I'll go through and I'll ask the company, are you actually doing this? Is this what you said you're doing this in your accident prevention program? Is this what you're doing? No, we don't do that. We do it a different way. Well, that's the reason for those annual audits. You need to go through your manual and make sure you don't have stuff in there that says you're going to do this, but you're not really doing it. You have to, whittle that down. That can come back to haunt you. So more specific, like Chuck says, smaller is sometimes better, but don't exclude something that you might want in there later.
yeah, and we have lots of good questions. So I'm glad you guys kind of saved a half hour of work because there's so many good ones in there. But Clarence, this is probably a good segue for you to talk about. So obviously with employee manuals and doing these plans, so that's kind of where you come in, right? You kind of get to know the firm, what they do, what their potential exposure would be. And then do you come in a capacity where you're reviewing these and then training the managers to train the team, or is it you're training management and the site workers or whoever? How does it work in your capacity?
Yes, I can. Yeah, if somebody asks me to do a safety manual for them, it's like I hate to just have to hand it to them and walk away. I'm always encouraging, please let me do a training program, at least for your managers or the people who will be using this, and describe to them how it works and the proper way to interpret it. That's for sure. But and also, if employee training is important, then we shift right into that. We can come in and do the training as well, for the employees on those different topics. But I just kind of side note here is I've written accident prevention programs for people who were in a hurry. If I don't have this in my hands by Wednesday, the compliance officer is going to cite me. And so I'll put something together for them. I meet with them and I say, let me go through the manual to explain it to you. No, they just want to take the binder and hand me a check and run away, because they're just excited about having this so that they don't get cited from the compliance officer. So I don't like to do business that way. I would rather sit down and take the time to go through each chapter and explain it, of what's in there and why it's in there.
Yeah, I think that's That's really good. I think it's just helpful to have a kind of a structure or layout on how it should be done and how often. So are you suggesting, once a year that they be reviewed and updated, and then training again once a year with everybody? How often should that be done? Because things
Well,
are,
like I said, there
yeah,
are some topics that require annual training. There's some topics that only require that you have training one time on that particular topic. But your program should be reviewed at least annually, and that is part of the code that you do review it. And go through and look at it and make those changes. Yeah, so I'm hoping that's answering your question there. If you're not doing asbestos work, then you don't have to worry about training on it. But if it is part of what you do, then it would be an annual.
yeah, that's perfect. And then Judy has some really good questions. So Judy's first question is, what about safety inside the building? Because a lot of our team is inside the building. Are there things that are common throughout offices that we should be aware of and look out for? That's her first question.
Yes, there are. I mean, these are simple things you would think, but you might say, no running on the stairs. Looking at Chuck here because we know of somebody who was running on the office, running down the stairs and fell and broke their arm. These are reminders that people do need. There are, lots of things in offices that can cause pretty serious injuries to people. And sometimes we get new people in the office who don't have a field, like a field experience, like a construction worker might have, but yet they're going to do something in the office of a construction nature. And then, using some tool that they're not familiar with. So yeah, office safety is as important as it is in the field. If you go comparing industries, industry to industry, it's like there's more accidents in hospitals than there are in chemical plants. You compare industries like that, it's kind of surprising. The industries that you'd think would be safe actually have a higher rate for incidents than the places that you would consider to be dangerous.
For us in our office, like seating comes up, sort of what the employer's responsibility is for an ergonomic chair or ergonomic workplace versus the employee's responsibility. Also with like repetitive motion, how much of their mouse work is on us because architectural work is a lot of mouse and keyboard, and how much is on them.
Yeah, and that should be part of your, your overall policy. And that's where you do the training and you remind everybody about, taking those breaks and, exercises and those all of that comes along with that ergonomic science, to prevent those soft tissue injuries. Yeah, that should be part of an annual training.
Gretchen put in the chat that she's always reminding people not to text on the stairs.
Yes.
And look at that text.
I get that.
And then Judy had a really, really good question. And so she's asking for recommendations for holding workers in the field accountable. What to do if a worker doesn't practice safety? Is that grounds for firing on the first offense? Or would you suggest 3 strikes and you're out? So kind of a lot of questions in one, but.
Okay. This is all part of your company's policy, and you want to make sure that you're not getting in trouble by treating one employee different than the other employee. So your program should be consistent. But yes, the company should always reserve the right to terminate someone's employment for an egregious violation. And that would mean that they knowingly and willingly committed an unsafe act that could have either got themselves injured or somebody else injured. Yes, those are grounds for immediate termination. But a policy first of let's make sure that we're not unfairly terminating this person's employment, and let's go take it back through. Let's go through retraining and make sure that person understands exactly what our policy is. And then your company should have this policy, like maybe a 3 or 4 step program where your first time that you, like one company I work with, they give you a written warning on your first day of employment. They give you that during your orientation. That's your first warning. And then after that, then you could get a written warning. And then after that, you could get some time off from work without pay. And then after that, then would come termination. But yeah, I said your policy should be consistent and everybody treated the same. That's the best way to handle it. It needs to be documented in some way so that you can show that you do enforce the rules. And that should be, everybody should understand that, yeah, you know, that they're not being treated unfairly because they know of the fact that you don't have to give out everybody's name or reasons, but you could say we had somebody get a written warning. You could publish that so that people would know that you do enforce as well.
That is a good answer. I had a weird question. So sometimes, we've only done it a couple times. So we have an office in California, and we've invited applicants that we're interviewing when it comes down to the final round to go on job sites with us and basically do a site inspection as part of their interview process. And so they walk around, observe the site, observe what they see, why it might be a problem. So we're strictly there as a site inspector. We're not lifting anything. We're not touching anything. We're not climbing upstairs. It's ground level. So as far as that, they're not an employee yet. So what are precautions that we could take beyond you're not an employee of us to design group? And so what other measures in an interview atmosphere?
Right. Do you know, being an employee or being responsible for them is kind of spelled out. You could have volunteers working for, you know, coming in to do something for you. They're not employees, they're volunteers, but you're still responsible for their safety.
Right.
Where you have somebody who is visiting with you, you can still be held accountable for their safety. So when you're going to have those kinds of situations where you're maybe taking somebody in to do an interview or a review or to observe their performance, yeah, you should develop a little policy about that. And what safety precautions do they need to be aware of? Like, do they need to be wearing a hard hat? Do they need to be wearing safety glasses? Do they need to be wearing gloves? What personal protective equipment should they have? The manner in which they're dressed. So how are you dressed when you come into that workplace? Is there possibility of being somewhere around machinery or something that's operating that could maybe grab a hold of loose clothing or something like that? Proper footwear. Yeah, you should have a list of these are the things that you're going to have to be in compliance with just to walk into the job site, even though you're not an employee. With that in mind, does that kind of help to answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we do, but I thought we'll probably need to expand a little bit more. So that's
Right.
helpful.
I think that's a really good idea to do, but my brain went immediately to, I'm bringing a person who's not an employee onto the job site as part of an interview. I would want to orientate them
Yeah.
before I don't care if we're standing on the ground or outside the fence. I'd probably, like you said, you're responsible for their safety. So could really look into how we're doing that for the hour we're there or whatever.
Totally. Yeah, good point. All right, does anybody else have any questions? I think I Terry, Judy, and Gretchen's questions.
Chuck, I appreciated your comments about, once you get into a tricky situation, then you need a way to get out safely, right? Sometimes it's the preventative, but sometimes it's okay. I'm already in a tricky situation. What training or what common sense do I have to get out? I think that's something that we haven't covered yet at my firm. So that was really helpful. And then that topic of speaking up, being able to say to an owner, actually, I'm not going to go there, is something else I want to add to our agenda for our safety meetings, because that's a tricky dynamic between architects and owners. And yeah, I wouldn't want one of my employees to feel pressured, onto a lift or something like that, because the owner, who, some of these developer types, don't want to stereotype, can be a little cavalier, are saying, let's go. And even though they have their training, they feel like it's hard to say no to the owner.
Yes, that's absolutely. We have that in construction on the jobs that I work on all the time. That we have that the owner wants us to do something, but they want it done right now, but we don't have the equipment on the job site to handle that safely. And we just have to say, I'm sorry, we're here to build this place for you, but there's something we can't do, and that's put our people at risk. So yeah, we have to do a little stand down there and give us a little time to get the right equipment onto the job site. I have had not in the past, not with Chuck's company but with others, is I actually made a rule that superintendents are not allowed to use ladders because they are the ones who want to jump in and do something, but yet they don't have the right ladder on the job site. It's not tall enough, or it's the most incorrect ladder. And sometimes they do this because it's the only ladder on the job. Everybody else is gone. And so at the last minute, they're going up to do something and they end up in the hospital because of it. So it's like, well, we'll just fix that problem. We'll just say superintendents are not allowed to be on ladders to keep that from happening. Again, I know that's, that's not a reasonable thing to say or do, but it's to draw the attention to the fact that they are prone to do that.
Well, Clarence, I saved my best question for last. We've got about 10 minutes. So I have been seeing this circle around, and I have not done a humongous deep dive into it, but I know it went into effect this month. But for Washington State, the outdoor heat exposure rule. And I was hoping that you could go and kind of touch on that, on who it impacts, what it is. They're requiring an outdoor heat exposure prevention plan, and they have a sample and all that. But I was kind of hoping you would do all the work, so I wouldn't have to learn it all.
If you're indoors, if you are indoors, then it's not considered a problem or something that you have to do. These rules were primarily written for people who are working outdoors in that extreme environments of working in the heat, that we provide them with a place of shelter that they can get in out of the heat or out of the sun, lots of water. All of that should be written into your plan, that you're providing all of that. A method of cooling somebody who may not be feeling very well because of the heat. Those are all guided, primarily when that rule came out, it was guided towards maybe most of the work on Eastern Washington, where we have agricultural workers out there, single family home builders that are out there that were getting into trouble with the heat, who didn't have an employer who was looking after them. So those rules were written primarily for them. But if we are working indoors, it's not an issue for us, and it's not something that we need to, spend a lot of time worrying about. If you can see the Washington State plan, if you can look at that, it's pretty specific and pretty simple to follow, right? Let me talk for just a second here about individual workers. If you're sending inspectors out to job sites and fall protection is an issue, this is where it becomes a good idea to have a policy and a plan that's based on the code itself. Because I get calls all the time where people will say, look, I'm just going up there for a minute to look at something that's on that roof. Do I have to rig fall protection? Do I have to have all of this fall protection equipment with me just to go out there to look at this one thing? And the answer, if you read in the code, if you are an inspector, all right, that you are allowed that because you're going to be very much aware of where the edge is. You're not conducting any work. All you're doing is looking, all right? And so therefore, in that particular case, in most situations, your inspector is allowed to do that. If you're going to conduct any work, technical work, all right, now you can go up there if you have somebody as a spotter for you, somebody who can continuously remind you where that roof's edge is, all right? So that's it's a couple of giving you a little bit of a wiggle room there when you're up on the roof, because I could see somebody spending more time rigging a fall protection system to be protected than it would take to actually walk over there and take a look at it and step back. So that's something to keep in mind. You could be increasing the person's exposure to a fall hazard by actually requiring them to be tied off 100%. But that's up to you individually as a company. You can certainly make rules that are more stringent than what the code requires. You are allowed to do that. You can increase that level of safety. That's great. And then a little earlier, I wanted to make a comment about something we talked about. If somebody looks at something and they say, that looks unsafe, but I'm not sure what the rules are. I mean, that's where Chuck comes from a lot of times. That looks unsafe, but I don't know what the rules are. What should I do here? Well, the answer to that is, if it looks unsafe, it probably is, okay? And do we need a rule? No, we do not need a rule to protect our workers. The rule book doesn't cover everything. Well, there is one part of it that does cover everything, and it's the safe place standard. And that's pretty much what the safe place standard says, is if it is a recognized hazard, then you have to protect your worker from it. All right. But I hope those last couple comments there will be kind of helpful to you with making some decisions.
That's super helpful. So I know, Clarence, you mentioned, we talked a little bit about you helping us put one in place, a safety plan, and just you're able to review others and provide training. I think, those are kind of the big things that you're passionate about. And so all his contact information is on the screen, but it will also be in the PowerPoint. If you guys have any questions or want to use Clarence as a resource, or Chuck for sure. Carrie has one more question for you. And she says, what about COVID? Has there been added to the employer's responsibility to protect employees? So COVID specific.
Yes. Okay. The companies, and I've seen both ends of this too. Like Abbott Construction, their response to COVID was just fantastic. It was just really great. They did everything for employee tracing. They just had a great plan. As you walked in the door, you had to sign in, several steps that you'd have to go through before you could get into the workplace. The personal protective equipment, like for masks and gloves and those sorts of things, were increased and enforced during that time.
Washing stations.
Yeah, washing stations, all of that, temperature check stations and all that. It was as good as any hospital that I've walked into. I do work for other contractors, particularly subcontractors, and some of the general contractors, they just held up their hand and says, not my problem. That's each individual subcontractor's problem, not mine. So they didn't do any contact tracing or, coordinate between subcontractors. But at the time, enforcement was pretty low, from the state. So there's nobody out there really checking to see that those things were actually truly happening. But like I said, it can be really good, and it wasn't that much of a difficulty. But for Abbott and a few of the other people that I work with, but it worked for a while.
Yeah, and our HR department was heavily involved in that process.
Yes,
it was about great communication and, like you said, keeping track of who's where and dates and follow-ups. And yeah, I was glad to see this slow down, but it feels again like we're maybe at the start of a little uptick again. So it's a constant issue with where we're at in the world of health these days, for sure.
Good feedback. Carrie, did that answer your question? Did maybe a little bit more elaboration on ongoing safety, not just
I was just wondering, since most of this safety stuff is in regards to physical accidents, isn't there an aspect for environmental hazards, and has COVID been folded into those environmental hazards that employees have to have permanently in their safety plan moving forward, or has that just been handled as a situational pandemic requirement?
It is being handled separately. And I tell you, and I think the reason why is because the requirements for protection seem to be moving pretty, from no mask to mask, or all those questions. I'm sure you all experienced the same thing as we did about they kept changing things. They kept changing the emphasis of what we needed to do to protect each other. At one point when we first started off, wearing surgical gloves was part of what we were doing. And then now you don't need the surgical gloves, just the mask. So like I said, it was kind of a moving target there for a while for us to be in compliance, but they're two separate issues. The environmental issues, COVID didn't affect any of the environmental issues that we had to deal with. We deal with those all the time. But that's still an important aspect of our job site, is in the environment. Abbott has a project right now where, the environment is a really big deal, even though it's just regular construction work, but we're in a very congested area for other people, that our neighbors or, other contractors and so on. So we've got silica dust that we have got to control. We've got carbon monoxide because of the equipment inside of a building that we've got to control. Lots of those kinds of issues do come up. They haven't affected the COVID thing at all, but it's just the stuff that we need to do.
The fun part with that piece is we have our policies with COVID, but our clients dictate what we have to do many times because sometimes theirs exceeds ours or it's below it. And so we have to balance that. Every situation different. What's safe? What are we putting our workers in that's safe for them? So
Good point. Well, very good. I think we're at 1 o'clock. So unless anybody else has any last burning questions, for anybody who wants to stay on, we're going to have a short chapter meeting. So Clarence and Chuck, you guys were phenomenal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of good nuggets. I have to wrap my brain around it and digest all the information because I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of follow up for you. So thank you for your time today. And so for next week, we've got a image consultant coming. I put the link in the chat as well as we've got one in a couple weeks with Jess Hickey again about getting promoted. And beyond that, I think I put the PDF of the safety PowerPoint in there, but we'll also distribute it. So I think that kind of takes care of everything that we have. So anybody who's able to stay on, please do. And I'm going to stop the recording. Have a good week. Again, Clarence and Chuck, thank you, thank you, thank you. Happy Thursday.